Hi, my name is Amy Crouch. I'm a little late getting to this. I am actually in Europe at the moment with my students, and I've actually dealt with some of the issues that we were learning about this week. I'm in Brussels at the moment, and we just left Amsterdam. They are absolutely learning about different cultures, which are eye-opening for many of them. So I figured I'm actually a sociology major at ASU, but I'm kind of maneuvering around some other classes. I'm a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. I teach everything from business classes, but my doctorate is actually in educational studies with a focus on inclusive curriculum. So some of this is stuff that is close to my heart. Let's see. If I'm looking at how do I understand the value of love, justice, equity, and inclusion, I think I was really drawn to the quote, and I have notes, so I have to go through these. The Quay et al. It dealt with being a human. It kind of made me think about those images where you just see like the x-ray vision of people. You don't see what they look like because we're just skeletons underneath. So the quote was, "What does it mean to be human? Who defines humanhood? How does one prove humanhood to the oppressor? I don't believe in all this diversity work in the way that we think about it in our field, because if we don't see each other as human, why would I even care to do that diversity work? I think the humanization piece is the core of what we should be focusing on. What makes you actually see someone as human?" I think that that's really about the love piece. I think it's about how, as a college professor and I do other administrative work, do I see my students as human, which means worthy? I also think I could flip that and hope that the students see themselves as humans, that they are worthy, whether it's worthy of an education, worthy of my time, worthy to succeed. I think that matters. So I think you could look at it from both perspectives. That's how I kind of see the value, and that love really kind of starts with certainly the caring that we give to the students, but also teaching them to love themselves. And I think that that's kind of thrown in throughout a lot of the readings that we had this week. Certainly when we have the discussion about voice agency for the students. In terms of justice and equity and inclusion, they certainly are all related to each other. I think a common term throughout kind of these discussions in education is intersectionality, and they all intersect with each other. I do think it's important that we are certainly focusing on this idea of equity, and almost kind of certainly, not that equality doesn't matter, I just think we have to look at it in terms of equity. Not that everyone gets the same number of pieces of pizza, but we actually feed the hungry. My own dissertation was literally about creating, or how California had to create an inclusive curriculum so that everybody didn't feel like it was just a token chapter on Native Americans or a token chapter on the LGBTQ population. I don't really know if it actually worked. When it asks what concepts and philosophies do I associate, throughout many of the readings, Freire is quoted, and he is a huge influence on my own work. Whenever I write like a teaching philosophy or a diversity statement, I absolutely tend to start with a quote from Freire, so I thought I would share that here. So my quote from him is, "It is for this reason that I stress that those wanting to teach must be able to dare, that is, to have the predisposition to fight for justice and be lucid in defense of the need to create conditions conducive to pedagogy in schools." I think as whether you're an educator or you're an administrator, kind of like Freire was saying, you have to dare. And that's even in some of the frameworks that we talked about. It's like that call to action. Multiculturalism isn't just about learning about it. You have to practice kind of what you've learned and then continually be active in the field. And you do have to dare, you have to push the bounds, you have to trouble the students, the other administrators. It's okay to sit in discomfort. We should feel uncomfortable at times, and it isn't about always a racial thing. It can be about all those different areas that they talked about within the reading. In terms of other concepts, there was so much. I took quite a bit of notes here. I'm trying to go through some of them. Certainly, the idea of DEI initiatives and all of the myths that go along with it, and I'll touch on the one that I thought that I picked. But I think that the ultimate goal is to help our students succeed. And how can we do that if we don't understand them? And I think that and one of the readings touched on that it isn't about just race. It's not just gender. When I taught in Indiana, people forgot that when you think about poverty, it's not just the inner city students, it's also our rural students and where they come from. They also struggle. Where I'm at now, there certainly will be a racial demographic that might lean heavy towards certain challenges, but some of the students where I teach certainly come from wealthy white families. Some don't. And I had expressed in a meeting that we need to be giving, students laptops when they start campuses because of the tech thing. And they're like, well, we tell them what to buy. Everybody can buy a laptop. And I try to stress that no, not everybody can buy a laptop. Not everybody has that kind of cash. And there was this just disconnect with my other committee members. They weren't able to see that there's a socioeconomic barrier for some of these students. It's great that they can get to the school. Maybe they have a scholarship, their parents take out loans, so they're pinching pennies. Just because they're at the school, we make an assumption that they can afford the school, when oftentimes they can't. And they ignore those kind of socioeconomic issues that often come up in terms of DEI. Let's see, what else did I put for that? I did think that the conversation and I guess the concepts about decolonization and literally just taking the land everywhere in Massachusetts, at least the state colleges all have to give credit to the land that they've taken because they took a lot of it. So that's been a quote. I don't know if it does much, right? It's like a statement on the website. It's a statement in your syllabus. I don't know if it goes much to address it, if it's really discussed. But I thought that was another concept that I read this week. And the ever-present idea to expand college campuses. I'm trying to think. Let me go back to my question. Sorry, it's been a little bit of a jet lag. Why is it important to be multiculturally competent? I kind of gave the example. I think that some of my fellow coworkers are not as multiculturally competent. Almost like it's like a blinders. I've had others not understand cultures with respect to dress, sometimes behavior, and there's been some challenges, and that goes along the lines with women, how they're approached. When you have older white men, they have said some things that are inappropriate around some of our younger female students, certainly stemming around eating disorders, just not culturally appropriate, and words of going such as, well, you're so pretty, you should never have a hard time getting a job. They don't recognize that that's inappropriate to say. So I still think there's a long way to go for teaching about cultural competence in terms of gender. In my so as an educator, I certainly teach in my class. I absolutely will discomfort my students, and I want them to dig deep. I certainly try to show them if, their statements, rethink about what you're saying, how you are saying it. Is that really appropriate? Where are you getting your information? Where are you getting your source? I've heard all kinds of things from my students. I did find that most of my students didn't know what gentrification was. I've had that a couple times in classes, so I had to explain it. We actually just left Amsterdam, and in that case, we met with more of kind of an intentional business community, circular economy, sustainability. But they talked about how originally the neighborhoods were set for workers in the factories, lower paying jobs. They all had a safe home. And now the area is getting gentrified, right? Where something used to cost, let's say, 200,000 euro, it's now going to cost $1 million. And so it's happening overseas. And they actually built this beautiful, intentional kind of community with, local businesses. They remediated the land naturally. They've got art. They have a great restaurant that's kind of only sources from local suppliers, is all natural. But their lease ends up in a couple years and it'll get torn down and they'll build more expensive apartments. So the students were kind of able to get a firsthand glimpse of what gentrification means versus just someone telling them. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. I'd like to do more of that in the future. I'd like to give them opportunities to have more reflective, experiences, to see what's going on when we have these discussions such as gentrification. A myth. I've read a few of them. The one I laughed about the most was the one dealing with how much someone makes as a DEI VP or president, and I have to go back into that one because I just laughed because the next thing was how much do the football coaches make. Even in my own school, I found out how much our football coach makes, and then I know how much I make, and I just was, it can be a little stressful, the disconnect, that you don't think that there's worth for the person doing that work, but it's the worth for what they spend on athletes or what they spend on other executives. It just is mind-boggling, but it's just another form of an attack. That absolutely is a myth that too much money is being spent. I would actually say the opposite. We don't spend enough money, and that even flips into the other concepts about the teacher training that is later in some of the readings. In Harper, in terms of that myth with spending money, I also looked at, what was another one that came from there? I think there were a few, and I really apologize. Let's see, what else did I find? Let's see. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I thought it was interesting that, that doesn't go into the myths, but I was drawn to the concept of like when whites work with other whites around racial issues, men discuss masculinity issues, yet still requires people to be multiculturally competent, because otherwise we just recycle the same thoughts. It just becomes more systemic. I do worry that these myths are getting harder and harder to refute. Not that there's not facts to refute them, but I do get worried. Obviously, I don't, one of the myths was DEI and critical race theory are synonymous. I just get frustrated when we keep thinking that CRT, which most people that talk about it have no idea. Even for me, I have to kind of step back and always kind of review CRT. I used a little bit of it in my own dissertation. Certainly it's, what does it mean when we say critical race theory? It's because we use the word race and the people assume that DEI is race. It is not. And I don't know how to break that barrier. I don't know how to say, if we say something has to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive, that people automatically aren't going to race. I think there's this level of inner guilt because we know there's a long history of racism in the United States. I think it's in all countries, and the things that countries have done to other races, other religions, other cultures, but they don't relate to each other. So that was another one of the ones that stood out. But I think that, well, hopefully, I don't really know if things will get better. One of the things that was talked a lot about is that as faculty, as administrators, the goal is to push, and as Ferrari said, to dare. I think now it's a scary time to dare. You have to be aware that if you go out of the country and come back, and depending who you are, daring to say something different, daring to speak about DEI could make it so that you can't even come back into our own country, your own country, especially if you're legal. I think some of these readings certainly take on a different light right now, and as things tend to be progressively worse. I hope that students find a voice, and that we give them the space to have that voice, that we teach them to have a voice, so that they can help fight the myths, and that as them being the future, whether it's future government, future educators, they push forth with what the knowledge that they've learned, that, again, DEI is not CRT. DEI is, I think, and I think it was I read through the Florida, the Campus Truths, and then the one with Victor Sañez, that DEI is really, it's a broad category. It covers everything, right? Like we said, from race to gender to age. I used to talk about age all the time in terms of DEI. My students would be really young and trying to get jobs, and they were discriminated against in some fashion because people didn't want to hire the young kids. I think that I have students on my trip across the spectrum, and integrating with everybody. To me, that's a DEI kind of great example of teaching different people about other cultures, other ways, other groups of people. So it doesn't just mean race. I think I've probably rambled a little bit too much in this one, but I am excited about the class. I've got tons of notes over here. Again, I do apologize for being late and probably being very tired. So that's it. Thanks. Bye.